He clapped at the end of my dry run like it was opening night on Broadway, and I was playing Macbeth with a PowerPoint. That, Greg said, pointing a chewed-up pen at me like it was a royal scepter, was scary good. I raised an eyebrow, tossed a half-eaten protein bar into the trash, and muttered, "Let's hope the board thinks so." Truth be told, I wasn't worried about the content. I was worried about the wolves in tailored suits who'd rather rip off a good idea than admit they didn't come up with it themselves. The merger between Hensley Freight and Castor Global had been my entire world for the better part of 8 months. Not a day off, not a weekend free. My coffee had its own seat in the meetings. I had built the modular integration system piece by piece, staying up late with legal to nail down compliance, and burning through printer ink like I was running an Etsy shop for bureaucrats. Everything lived in that system: HR transitions, IT protocol alignment, supply chain mapping, client-side onboarding, every strand of two companies weaving into one clean braid. And now I had to pitch it to the people who'd sign the checks and take the credit. Greg, my assistant, stood behind my chair and massaged my shoulders like he was prepping a prizefighter. "You should copyright this thing," he joked, like he always did before I stepped into a room full of people with titles and fragile egos. I laughed, but not really. He was right. I had built it through my consultancy LLC back when I was technically still a contractor. We were so behind when they finally hired me full-time, I just kept using my existing structure. There was never time to transfer ownership. The clause protecting my IP, still there. I hadn't thought much about it, until now. Anyway, before I go full paralegal on you, if you're into stories about office betrayal, poetic justice, and some delicious corporate karma, tap that subscribe button and maybe throw a like this way. You wouldn't believe how much that helps keep stories like this coming, and trust me, this one, it only gets better. Back to the war room. The final rehearsal ran late, past midnight. Greg dozed off once during a version control demo, and I nearly wept trying to sync one last client-side API timeline. But when I finally walked into that conference room the next morning, heels clicking like I was about to command a courtroom, I felt ready. I wore the gray blazer, the power blazer, the one I'd worn to close 2 previous acquisitions and talk down a union lawyer in Jersey. If that jacket had a scent, it'd be espresso and blood pressure meds. The room was packed. Castor's execs sat on one side, silk ties, expensive boredom. Hensley's brass on the other, frustrated ambition wrapped in khaki. At the head, CEO Marcus, silver-haired and smiling like he'd already spent the stock bump. And just to his right, sipping some protein sludge through a silicone straw, was his nephew, Bryce. God help me, Bryce. The guy had been VP of product for 3 weeks. Before that, something called entrepreneur in residence at a think tank that mostly posted on Instagram. He once said synergy 5 times in a 10-minute update and called an API a technical personality quiz. Now here he was, flipping through his iPad like he was prepping to order brunch. I plugged in, lights dimmed. I began. Slide 1, merger benefits by department. Slide 2, pre-merger redundancies and streamlining forecast. Slide 3, the crown jewel, my framework. A 3-phase modular rollout designed to handle both corporate cultures and technical infrastructure. The slide animation moved like butter, and for a second I saw real nods. Engagement. A breath of pride slipped out of me. Then a cough. "Sorry to interrupt," Bryce said, standing. He wasn't sorry. He had the face of a man who apologizes with flowers after getting caught texting his ex. "I've actually put together an alternate vision," he continued, already casting from his iPad to the main screen. A more agile, millennial-forward framework. I froze. On the wall his first slide appeared, and I swear to God he had used my terminology. Sloppy, rebranded, colors changed. Some bullshit quotes from tech blogs pasted over what used to be workflow diagrams. He'd gutted it, Frankensteined the structure, and thrown his name on it like a drunk graffiti artist with a stolen spray can. The room clapped. They clapped. Even Marcus leaned back, nodding like Bryce had discovered fire. I shut my laptop, didn't argue, didn't flinch, just said all the best and walked out. No one followed, not even Greg. That was the moment they lost everything. They just didn't know it yet. The walk from that boardroom to my office felt like I was dragging my own body behind me. I didn't storm off. I didn't slam the door. That would have given them too much power, like they'd rattled me. No, my face stayed calm, but my molars were doing the tango. Behind my eyes, full-blown electrical fire. Let me paint it for you. 8 months of 16-hour days, weekends blurred into spreadsheets, client calls from airport bathrooms, and I don't even travel. And that overcooked slab of nepotism in a Patagonia vest strolls in, cuts me off mid-sentence, and announces his visionary new framework like he's dropping the Gettysburg Address. The gall on that man. And the slides? Oh, the slides. I wanted to gouge my eyes out with the laser pointer. Same section headers, same acronyms. He even kept my color coding, just swapped the muted corporate tones for whatever toddler palette he pulled from a startup Instagram ad. Client cohesion pathway became relationship ride. I wish I was joking. He'd replaced stakeholder matrices with memes. There was a clip art rocket labeled Launch Day Vibes, a quote from Elon Musk. By slide 3, I wasn't even angry, I was insulted. I looked around the room and saw bobbleheads. People nodding, smiling, whispering disruptive like they'd just tasted innovation for the first time. They weren't listening to him. They were hypnotized by his confidence, the way clueless men always are when another clueless man speaks with his whole chest. I glanced at Marcus, the CEO, the man who recruited me, the one who said, "You need someone who can actually run this thing." He didn't make eye contact, just crossed his arms and watched the screen like it was a fireworks show, so I shut my laptop, slowly, deliberately. There was a moment of quiet, like maybe they thought I'd chime in, offer feedback, or ask to collaborate. Instead, I stood up and said, "All the best." It wasn't a farewell. It was a warning. I walked out, heels echoing like gunshots. The door closed behind me. Nobody followed, not Marcus, not Bryce, not even Greg, though I knew he wanted to. That was the worst part, not the betrayal, the apathy. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat at my desk, stared at my monitor, and whispered to myself, let them have it then. Because what they didn't know, what Bryce didn't know, is that his flashy slideshow wasn't standing on his shoulders. It was balanced on the back of months of my legal filings, my code architecture, my licensing agreement with a system I never officially transferred. Every integration point, every backend API call, every automatic report, it all flowed through my system. And the second I walked out that door, the license clock started ticking. I opened the cabinet behind my desk and pulled out a black folder. My initials were embossed on the front, AJR, in silver. Inside, original drafts, a copy of the license agreement, and one very specific clause: all proprietary infrastructure and modular data handling systems shall revert to creator upon termination of service. Termination. I wasn't fired, but I was very much done. I printed a copy of the clause and stapled it to the front of the folder, slid it into an interoffice envelope, addressed it to legal. No post-it, no smiley face, just effective today. Then I opened my terminal and began deleting. No, not sabotaging, this isn't some cartoon villain origin story, just tidying up my directories, removing anything that didn't belong to them, which, as it turned out, was most of it. And the stuff they thought they still had access to? Let's just say without the license handshake, it'd be about as useful as a typewriter in a Tesla. I turned in my badge at reception. The woman behind the counter blinked. "Amanda, are you sure?" I smiled, serene as a monk about to blow up a monastery. "Tell Marcus I said good luck." Then I walked out, into the sunlight, into the silence. They thought I lost, but what they actually lost? Well, they were about to find out. The office was too quiet after I left the conference room, like the building knew something had shifted. My nameplate still sat on the door, Amanda Rivers, Director, Strategic Integration, the bold little lie of permanence. I didn't even bother closing the door behind me. Let them see me one last time, not storming or crying, just methodically ending something they'd never understand. I sat down, brushed a stale oat bar wrapper off the keyboard, and opened the print queue. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. There was no dramatic soundtrack, just the low hum of the printer warming up, and the soft mechanical sighs as it spat out the last move in a game they didn't realize they were losing. The folder was already prepped. Black leather, metal corners, looked like something you'd keep cash or confessions in. Inside was everything: a notarized copy of the architecture licensing agreement, screenshots of the framework's original shell dated 3 weeks before my first official onboarding email, log of hours billed under my LLC, and the clause, my golden parachute. Clause 14.2, subsection B, ownership of modular integration infrastructure shall remain with architect unless formally transferred via written amendment. There was no amendment. Legal never pushed for one. We were always too busy, remember? They thought onboarding me full-time made my work theirs. They forgot I was still billing through Rivers Integration Services, LLC, when I built the bones of that system. Hell, the first 4 months of client modeling were literally written under a logo that wasn't theirs. I gave them a copy, not custody. And when you don't sign the adoption papers, you don't get to keep the baby. I placed the freshly printed cover page on top of the documents in the folder, closed it gently, and wrote in sharp black ink across the envelope, "To legal, immediate attention." No flourish, no passive-aggressive smiley face, just facts. Then I turned to my screen and got to work. First, I disconnected all local sync points between my cloud repositories and the company servers. Their IT wouldn't notice right away. Bryce probably didn't even know there were repositories. I ran my personal kill script, not destruction, just removal. All personal contributions flagged under my LLC tag, deleted. Licensing integrations, deactivated. Anything they'd built on top of it, still there, but it wouldn't function. Not without the access tokens I held. Not without the architecture sitting dormant behind an encrypted handshake they couldn't trigger. They could poke at the skeleton, sure, but the blood was mine. I packed my bag, no dramatic toss of papers into the trash. I wasn't in a movie, I was in a chess game, and I had just moved my queen to threaten the entire board. At reception, the same woman from earlier, Aya, watched me like I'd grown a second head. "You're really leaving?" "Looks like it," I said, handing her my badge. "If anyone needs me, I'll be unavailable." She opened her mouth, but I was already walking. There were no hugs, no goodbyes, not even Greg. I'd messaged him one thing: don't follow me down with them, you're better than this place. Outside, the sky was threatening rain but not delivering. Typical. I got into my car, tossed the blazer into the back seat, and drove 2 blocks before pulling over next to a quiet coffee shop. I needed caffeine, Wi-Fi, and a moment to breathe. That's when my phone buzzed. Email from legal. Subject, folder received urgent follow-up required. I smiled. It had begun. They thought I'd walk out and disappear, that I'd fold, but they'd built their empire on a foundation I still owned. And now the lease was up. The first sign was the silence, not the kind that comes from peace, but the kind that rolls in like a storm front before everything goes sideways. At exactly 9:14 a.m. the next day, the finance department realized their dashboards weren't populating. KPIs were stuck in limbo. Accounts payable was throwing error codes like confetti, and someone, bless them, tried to reboot the entire system from their desktop like they were restarting a router. By 9:47, head of HR sent a Slack message to all VPs that simply read, "Why are our onboarding protocols down?" with an attached screenshot of a 404 error and a skull emoji, which, while inappropriate, was at least accurate. By 10 a.m., they were in a panic. The architecture wasn't broken. It was gone. Not physically, of course. The shell was there. The buttons were still clickable. The menus still looked polished. But the heartbeat, the back-end logic, the automation flows and live sync integrations that actually made it work, gone. What they had was a beautifully designed corpse. And in the middle of it all, Bryce posted a black and white headshot on LinkedIn, looking off into the distance like he was pondering the secrets of the universe. Caption: proud to unveil a more agile, responsive merger framework for our partners at Castor Global. True innovation comes from bravery. #leadership, #transformation, #next-gen thinking. 200 likes in 10 minutes. I nearly snorted wine out my nose. It was early afternoon, and I was already on my second glass, post-lunch of course. I'd set up camp at a quiet little bistro 5 blocks from the office. Outdoor seating, decent Wi-Fi, and the kind of waiter who knows not to ask questions when a woman in business attire orders a bottle before 1 p.m. I had my laptop open, not working, just watching. Emails were already leaking from the dam. Urgent, anyone understand Amanda's API schema? Does anyone have access to the system tokens? Why is our Atris data not syncing? Who deleted our backup plan? I wasn't reading them out of spite. I was reading them because it was art. At 3:42 p.m., my phone rang. Greg. I let it buzz once, twice, then answered. Hey, I said, as if I hadn't just watched his company implode from a patio table over sea base and Sauvignon Blanc. They don't know what broke, he whispered. Amanda, they're freaking out. What do you mean they don't know? I stirred my wine lazily. I mean, finance is blaming IT is blaming ops is blaming Bryce, and Bryce is blaming. He paused. Well, he said your system wasn't resilient to modern innovation stress. I laughed, loudly. The waiter jumped. Greg kept going. Legal thinks they own the system. They're trying to figure out how to reauthorize the integration bridges, but everything keeps leading to clause 14.2, I said, finishing his sentence. Subsection B, he exhaled. They didn't read the contract, Amanda. No one did. They assumed it was internal. They assumed wrong. Another pause, then softer. You planned this. I protected my work, I said simply. They made it theft. Silence on the other end. Then they want you to come in. I smiled, leaned back, watched a pigeon attack a croissant crumb with more grace than Bryce had shown in that boardroom. They can want a lot of things, I said. Doesn't mean they're getting them. We sat in the silence of corporate collapse for a beat too long. Greg finally said, I'm sorry I didn't follow you out. You will, I said, soon. After we hung up, I refreshed LinkedIn. Bryce had posted again. A photo of himself standing in front of the main office window, arms crossed. Caption, pressure reveals diamonds. I nearly choked laughing, because inside that building, they weren't finding diamonds. They were digging through ashes. By Thursday morning, the company was in full spin mode, duct taping their pride together with frantic calendar blocks and Slack threads labeled Fire Urgent Fire. IT was in the trenches, crawling through lines of code like digital archaeologists trying to reconstruct a machine from hieroglyphics. The thing was, they weren't just missing the parts, they were missing the blueprint, because I never left them a user manual. I was the manual, and they deleted me. Bryce, according to Greg, had stopped showing up in person. He was running meetings remotely now, voice sharp with panic beneath the bravado. I pictured him pacing in his apartment, unshaven, shirtless, using phrases like pivot execution architecture while Googling what a reverse proxy is. They didn't need a miracle. They needed me, but I had other plans. At 10:21 a.m., I got the email. Subject, Urgent Compliance Review Contractual Clause 4.2. It was from Castor Global. More specifically, their M and a compliance liaison. Polite, corporate, precise, exactly the kind of tone that meant they weren't just checking in. They knew. The email was CC'd to Hensley's legal and executive teams, and it wasn't a question so much as a formality. Excerpt. In light of recent instability observed during the integration trial window, we would appreciate formal confirmation that all systems currently in use remain in compliance with Licensing Clause 4.2 of the original Architecture Agreement translation. Why is your infrastructure bleeding out? And do you even legally own it? I smiled so hard I scared the barista. My reply was short, not curt, just surgical. Please refer to Section 4.2 of the enclosed architecture agreement. For clarity, continued usage post-termination without amendment constitutes breach. Documentation attached. Attached were the same documents I'd left for legal. Signed, time-stamped, notarized. I even bolded the sentence where usage rights reverted immediately upon my departure. I didn't add commentary, I didn't need to. The silence that followed was its own kind of applause. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I didn't answer. Then Greg texted, "You just lit the whole damn building on fire." I finished my kwasa. At 12 o'clock sharp, I stepped into a high-rise on Madison, lobby full of polished concrete and brushed steel. I'd been invited to a private lunch with Redbridge Analytics, a firm that made Castor look like a toddler with a calculator. They'd caught wind of the meltdown, of course. Corporate blood always draws corporate sharks. The receptionist handed me a badge with my name already printed. Amanda Rivers, M. and a systems consultant. I pinned it on, adjusted my blazer, and walked into the conference room like I hadn't just sunk a multi-million-dollar merger from a coffee shop across the street. There were 6 people inside, real players. Couple managing directors, 1 partner, and a woman with sharp eyes who didn't smile as she stood to shake my hand. "Thanks for coming," she said. "We heard you were available." I returned the handshake with a grip that said, "I always land on my feet." "Oh," I said, "I'm not just available. I'm already building something better." And just like that, I was done looking backward. They could keep Bryce. I was here to build empires. Bryce was summoned at 7:42 a.m. Before his protein smoothie, before his mental clarity affirmations, before he could slap on whatever quarter zip he thought made him look executive. Marcus didn't even bother going through an assistant. Just called, flat voice, "Office. Now." Inside the boardroom, the air was thick with toner fumes and silent accusations. Bryce tried to carry himself like a man walking into a brainstorming session, not an execution. But his swagger collapsed the second he saw who was already seated. Head of Legal, CIO, Compliance, and 2 directors from Castor Global, looped in via conference screen, faces frozen in that corporate half-scowl people get when they're preparing to ruin someone. Marcus didn't gesture for him to sit. "Explain why our systems are failing," he said, voice like granite. Bryce opened his mouth to spin some TED talk word salad, but Legal cut him off. "Your framework," she said, stressing it like it was a joke, "isn't a framework. It's a reskinned version of Amanda's system with half the logic stripped out and none of the legal clearance." He blinked. "But it was built internally." "No, it wasn't," snapped the CIO, flipping a folder open with the kind of violence reserved for courtroom dramas. "Amanda's LLC licensed it, to us, not to Castor, not to any future merger entity. And definitely not to you." The room froze. Bryce's ears turned red. Then Castor's voice crackled through the speakers. A calm, lethal voice. "We have reviewed the clause Amanda Rivers cited. Based on current events and lack of compliance with Section 4.2, we are placing our merger agreement under immediate legal suspension pending full remediation. Our counsel will issue notice of breach by close of business." Marcus looked like he aged 10 years in 30 seconds. "We can fix this," Bryce stammered. "I mean, we'll rebuild it, right? Internally, or just we'll buy her out or whatever." "No, genius," said Legal, standing now. "You can't buy what you already breached. She owns the architecture. We leased it. And she walked with the source code, the deployment keys, and the reputation. We're out of license, out of time, and out of her patience." Bryce looked to Marcus, still hoping for rescue, but Marcus didn't move. "I vouched for you," Marcus finally said, voice low. "Told the board you were ready." "I am. You're a child in a borrowed suit," he hissed. "You didn't just screw up a deal. You stole from someone who warned us, protected us, and built the only thing keeping this place from sinking. And you put your name on it." Bryce's mouth opened, but no words came. Across town, I was sitting in a sunlit atrium at Redbridge, watching the Castor Global stock ticker dip on my phone. They hadn't announced the pause yet, but the market knew. It always knows when the sharks smell blood. My inbox pinged. Subject, urgent request to reopen licensing discussion sender. Hensley Legal. I didn't open it. Instead, I forwarded it to my lawyer, added a single line, hold for leverage, and closed my laptop. They wanted the system back, but I wasn't in the business of second chances. Not when they tried to erase my name and crown the intern king. Not when they stood and clapped while he butchered my work with tech buzzwords and a Canva template. They could spin, scramble, and beg. I was already 3 meetings deep into a new empire, and they were still trying to glue the old one back together with chewing gum and entitlement. By Friday morning, the panic had calcified into something worse. Desperation. The type of desperation that makes executives who used to ignore your existence suddenly remember how to spell your name. Marcus, who hadn't looked up from his coffee when I walked out, was now burning through legal options like incense at a seance. Except instead of spirits, he was summoning me. They tried subtle first. An email from someone in HR I barely knew, subject line, "Quick sync?" No body, no attachments, just 2 words. Then came the legal nudge. "Amanda, we'd appreciate a moment of your time to discuss a short-term consulting opportunity." Just a week of transition support while our team realigns architecture strategy. Realigns, cute, then came the bribe, different email, bigger subject line. Double comp plus flexible terms, urgent support needed. I didn't open it, but my lawyer did. She read it out loud while sipping chai. They're offering double your previous salary, plus remote flexibility, executive title bump, and full NDA retraction if you agree to consult for 7 business days. I sipped my espresso. 7 business days isn't enough to fix what they broke. Exactly. They're buying headlines. They want to tell Castor you're back so the merger doesn't collapse on Monday. I nodded, already opening LinkedIn. New post. Amanda Rivers M. and a systems consultant integration architect ex Hensley Freight, which been now available for strategic contracts and complex system integrations, M and a transitions and infrastructure recoveries. References available upon request. Also, don't steal. Hash mergers and acquisitions, hash architecture matters, hash not your framework, 50 minutes. Over 3,000 views, 26 connection requests, 2 recruiters in my inbox. At the 30-minute mark, Greg texted. Greg, you knew this would happen, didn't you? Me, shushing face, Greg, be honest. Me, sends gif of dominoes falling, he replied with a skull emoji, and a moment later a photo from inside the office. The main dashboard screen, usually filled with client data, now showing a Windows error and the phrase, framework initialization failed. They were running out of time. IT had tried a rollback, but since they'd removed most of my core logic and replaced it with Bryce's vision, the system kept collapsing under its own weight. Worse, every error ping was being logged and mirrored by Castor's transition oversight team. The merger window was slamming shut. Marcus called. I let it ring. Then a second call from a number I didn't recognize. This one left a voicemail. Bryce. His voice was shaky, artificially calm, like he'd practiced it in the mirror. Hey, Amanda. Look, I just wanted to extend an olive branch. I think we both know things got a little out of hand, but if we could just hop on a call, maybe find some common ground, delete. No reply. Instead, I forwarded his voicemail to my lawyer. Labeled it unsolicited outreach retained for records. That night, I went to a rooftop dinner with Redbridge's lead integration strategist. The skyline shimmered. They asked what it would take to bring me on full-time. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. I was done chasing titles. Now, I had leverage, recognition. The reputation of being the woman who walked away from a house of cards just before it collapsed and owned the floor they were standing on. And the best part? They were still inside that crumbling house, duct taping windows shut and praying no one noticed the foundation was gone. Meanwhile, I was sipping wine 4 stories up, watching the smoke rise. They showed up at 8:03 a.m. on a Sunday. 2 IT guys and a compliance analyst, sweating through their company polos like they'd jogged the whole way over. I heard the desperate knock before I'd even finished my first sip of coffee. My robe was still cinched, hair wrapped in a towel, steam curling from the mug in my hand like a damn Folgers commercial. I peeked through the window and smiled. They looked like missionaries who'd lost their faith on the porch. I opened the door slowly. Let them stew in their discomfort a moment longer. Morning, I said, leaning against the frame. Y'all lost? The taller one, Pete, I think from infrastructure, shifted his weight like his shoes suddenly didn't fit. Hi, Amanda. We were hoping you might be willing to talk. The other one, Ali, was clutching a manila folder like it was a hostage ransom. You brought paperwork to my house? I asked, raising an eyebrow. It's just a mutual clarification agreement, Ali said quickly. Legal drafted it, non-binding. Just some technical disclosures. We're trying to stabilize the integration layer and we're kind of stuck. I took a long sip from my mug, savoring it like a warm secret. Stuck how? Pete stepped forward. We know there's a fail-safe architecture that was removed. We can't trace the rollback protocol. Bryce said. I held up my hand. Please, I said, don't quote Bryce to me before I've had breakfast. They stood there, silent, red-faced, unsure what to do with their hands. I let the pause stretch. Then I opened the door wider. Come in. You look like you need caffeine more than I do. They hesitated, then shuffled in, heads down. I poured coffee, real coffee, not the motor oil sludge from the office kitchen. Sat them down at my dining table, where my laptop was still open to a proposal draft for Redbridge. You're not here for my help, I said, sliding a sealed envelope across the table. You're here because you've been sent to beg for access. Ali reached for the envelope. I tapped it once before he could lift it. That's from my counsel, I said. Inside, you'll find a letter detailing the breach of license as defined by Clause 4.2 of the Architecture Agreement. It outlines unauthorized usage, retroactive access attempts, and pending damages. Pete looked pale. Amanda, this affects payroll next week. Finance is not my concern, I said. Castor's threatening to dissolve. I leaned in, eyes level. Castor isn't threatening. They're preparing. There's a difference. You built your castle on my code, then gutted it and slapped Bryce's name on the gates. And now that the moat's on fire, you come knocking. Ali opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Read the first line, then the second. His lips moved like he was sounding it out. I stood, collecting my mug. Oh, I added over my shoulder, and when you go back, do me a favor. Tell your VP to stop calling it a framework. Pete blinked. Sorry, it's a system. A framework is what you post on Medium to get clout. What I built was scalable, dynamic, and legally protected. He never understood the difference. That's why you're here. They didn't respond. They couldn't. I walked them to the door, handed them a to-go container of pastries out of some lingering human decency, and shut it behind them. Not slammed, just shut. Soft, final. I could judge bringing down the gavel. Behind the door, I leaned against the wood and took a long, slow breath. That moment, watching them walk away with the letter they thought would save them but would only dig the grave deeper, wasn't just satisfying. It was righteous. They had erased my name. Now I was erasing their illusion. The news broke on a Tuesday. Castor Global issued a press release at 9:01 a.m. Eastern, just as the markets opened. Due to unresolved compliance concerns and technical misalignment, we have elected to withdraw from the Hensley Freight merger effective immediately. We wish their team the best in future endeavors. It was cold, surgical, the corporate version of ghosting someone you almost married. Within an hour, Hensley's phones melted down. Stock took a nosedive, not catastrophic, but enough to make board members sweat through silk. Enough to make someone ask, who approved this integration? Out loud in a shareholder call. Marcus resigned that afternoon. Voluntary departure to pursue personal projects. Translation: pushed out the emergency exit with his golden parachute half inflated. He left without comment, without apology, without even acknowledging the name of the woman who had saved his company before they handed it to a glorified intern with an Instagram addiction. And Bryce vanished. Literally gone from the org chart. LinkedIn scrubbed. Emails bouncing. Word from Greg was that he'd been transferred to a temporary innovation initiative, which is corporate speak for duct taping a dunce cap to someone and shoving them in a basement with a whiteboard. No public fallout, no statement, just silence where his bravado used to be. Meanwhile, I was in Valencia. Warm breeze, salt air, rooftop terrace overlooking terracotta rooftops and the sound of distant music drifting up from the plaza. My new client, a sustainability logistics firm, flew me out first class, put me up in a 5-star boutique hotel with blackout curtains so perfect I almost missed my own victory. They were paying me triple what I'd made at Hensley. But that wasn't the real reward. The real reward came in the form of text. It was from Greg, just a screenshot. A memo from Hensley's internal Slack. Subject line: effective immediately. All future integrations must include licensed architecture documentation approved by legal and verified by third-party audit. Beneath it, a list of action items. Committee assignments, compliance reviews. I read it twice just to let the irony soak in. Then I smiled, set my phone down, and picked up my wine. The glass was cold in my hand. The sunset lit the buildings across the square in gold. Somewhere below, someone was playing guitar. And for the first time in months, I wasn't building something for someone else. I was just living. They had tried to erase me. Now their entire company would carry the signature of my absence. And me? I had the signature of my future. On contracts written in my terms, under my name. Not bad for a woman who walked out with a folder and a smile. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.